Hello and welcome back. It's not about what you know. It really, really isn't. And I'm sure as an expert in your area, you know a huge amount. If I put you in a room with another expert in your area, you could probably talk for hours, possibly even days about your subject area. It really isn't about what you know. It is about what you signal about what is happening now, what you're talking about now, and what is happening next that will give your audience a sense of whether you have gravitas, whether you have executive presence or not. Today, we're going to be talking about executive presence and female leaders and really why it's so essential for career development, for personal development, for really having a satisfying career or impact on the world or developing your own business, whatever it might be, why executive presence is so important. And then the three elements that make up executive presence and what you can do about it to really improve your impact, your executive presence, whenever you're speaking to your audiences. I'm Emma and I am a voice coach. I help women raise their visibility and their credibility at work through my organization, Speaking at Work. Welcome to today's talk, and it's all about women leaders and executive presence. So first of all, before we dive into what executive presence is and what we can do about it, let's talk about why it's important. Because if we know why it's important, it's much easier to access the motivation to really start to develop our own executive presence with real ease and ability. So the first reason that executive presence is really, really important actually has to do with non-alignment. So if we stand up to present an idea, we might be providing a solution to a problem at work. We might be asking for more budget or more resources. We might be talking about why one of our team really deserves a promotion. Whatever it might be, it doesn't really matter what the content is. What matters is whether the content and how we are presenting, how we are showing up, how we're standing, how we're speaking, how we're gesturing is aligned. If the two things are aligned, the way that we are speaking and the content, it is so much easier for our audience to understand our message. Now, if it's not aligned, if we haven't developed executive presence, if we're not demonstrating it when we talk, what happens is that audience can't concentrate on the message because they've got to use cognitive processing to really understand that message. And what they're distracted by is what's going on with our body, our breath, and our voice. If we're not demonstrating executive presence, unconsciously or subconsciously rather, subconsciously, your audience is going to get distracted. They're going to focus on the biggest thing that they can focus on, and that's your body. And so if your body is not demonstrating executive presence, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a minute, but if it's not doing that, they start to look at that and they're like, I'm not sure about this. And they stop listening to the content. They stop listening to what it is that you're trying to persuade them of or convince them of, because that requires effort to linguistically process the things that you're saying. It doesn't require any effort because the oldest bit of our brain, the reptilian part of the brain, is looking at that body language. It's reading the other animal body and going, yeah, everything's good. Or it's going, oh, I'm not sure. There's something that's not quite right here. And then we sort of take a step back. So one of the big reasons is for developing executive presence. It just makes it so much easier for your ideas to land. You could spend hours, days, weeks, even months perfecting a presentation so the content is just incredibly superior. Your argument is so solid. But if you're not presenting that idea with executive presence, if you're not aligned, it kind of doesn't really matter. They will process some of the content, they will understand what you are saying, but not with the ease that they would if everything was aligned, if you had executive presence and you were oozing that confidence and that self-belief in the idea, but also a sense of flexibility as well. So it's really important for our ideas to land that we have developed a strong ability to show executive presence whenever we are speaking, whether that's a formal situation like the presentation I was just mentioning, or whether that's a water cooler conversation, or whether it's a team meeting. We want to be demonstrating executive presence in all of those areas. And the reason we want to be doing that is because perception is reality. So if we are perceived in formal, informal, small gatherings, large gatherings, as someone who exudes executive presence, that becomes your narrative. That becomes your story within your organization. Or if you're an entrepreneur, that becomes the story with your investors. That becomes the story within your teams, with other competitors. You become the person that they believe, the perception is that you have executive presence. And that then is how you're thought about. So you're forefront of mind for ideas and for opportunities that come up within the organization or outside your organization, if that's appropriate. So the perception is really, really important. So we want to be exuding executive presence as often as possible and as authentically as possible, because that will get picked up. If it's faked and it's put on, then your audience will pick that up incredibly quickly. So really, it's about opportunity, because when we have that executive presence and our ideas are really landing and we are perceived as somebody who has executive presence in all areas of our career or business, then those opportunities come knocking. They come to us, that we are found because we're forefront of people's minds. They're thinking, oh yeah, I need to go and talk to so-and-so because they're really great at this idea, or we should definitely get so-and-so onto this program because they are really, really effective and they will make an impact with this particular client or with that particular account. So it's very important that our perception is well received. The perception of us is that we have executive presence, and that allows us to use and be given opportunities that come up across our organization. And then the final reason that executive presence is really important is to do with thought leadership. Whenever we are changing organizations and we're going for a new job and we're in a relatively senior position, organizations will look to, and there's lots of research on this, will look to your thought leadership. So they'll look out there for the things that you've written. They'll look out there for the videos that you've made. They'll look out there for the interviews that you have been on, whether that's television or podcast or radio, whatever it might be. And they will be looking to see and hear executive presence. And once they've done that, about 81% of organizations actually do that. They will actually look at you, check you out before you're called in for an interview. And if they see what they like, it really increases the trust factor. I think it's around 51%. It will increase the trust factor. That means when you go in for that interview, or when you go to talk to them about a particular project, because this could be a client that's checking you out, it could be an investor that's checking you out. When you go to have that conversation, they already have a positive idea about you. So they've already started to buy into you. And then when you get there, you just have to kind of seal the deal on them buying into you, and then sell them your idea, sell them the concept of whatever it is you want them to be believing about you or your organization or the investment that they're about to make, whatever it is. They've already started that process before they meet you, if you have thought leadership out there that is demonstrating executive presence. Now, if you've got thought leadership out there that isn't demonstrating executive presence, obviously that's going to slightly undo. That means you've got a bit more of an uphill struggle when you get there. So we really want to be making sure that when we're putting ourselves out there, when we're getting more visible, which we need to do as we rise through an organization or as we're growing and scaling a business, that the things that are out there are really doing us justice, are really doing ourselves justice and our ideas justice. So those are really important points around why we need executive presence. So we need everything to be aligned so that the perception of us is strong within and beyond our organization, so that we're given opportunities to demonstrate our skills and our abilities. And obviously that is has an impact in terms of the rewards that we're likely to get in terms of promotion and pay as well. So that's really, really important. And also that our thought leadership, any thought leadership that is out there, is really demonstrating our executive presence. Because remember, we want to be demonstrating not only that we can do it now, but we can also be able to cope with and be brilliant at what's coming next. That is the really, really important part of executive presence. It's not just now, it's the next bit, because that's the bit that's going to afford us all these opportunities that we really want to develop our career or scale our business. So we've talked a little bit around why executive presence is really, really important. But let's talk about what executive presence is, because it's one of those things that's a bit nebulous. It's a little bit hard to pinned down, and various different organizations, various different structures have different ideas about what executive presence is. So the way that I talk about it from a voice perspective, because I'm trying to help women particularly develop executive presence, the way that I would look at this is to give you an equation. So essentially, we've got a very simple equation. We've got stuff above the line and stuff below the line. So let's talk about the stuff that comes above the line first of all. And this is really broken down into 3 parts. We need gravity, levity, and we need grace under fire. So let's talk about gravity first of all. So gravity can mean that we have a sense of connectedness, of calmness, of strength in the lower body. So if we were going to look at it physically, we'd want to see that somebody had strength in the lower body, that their feet were well connected to the floor, that they weren't bouncing up and down on their toes or constantly walking from left to right or any of those kinds of things, that they feel strong and connected. Because if we are following that person, if you're that leader, we want to feel a sense of like, we're okay, we're safe with this person. And again, if you're speaking, whether that's in an auditorium or to a few people in a meeting room, we want a sense of strength and connection to the ground, that this person is calm and collected. And that's the other part of it. So we've got the physical sense of them being connected to the ground, but we also want a sense that they are emotionally calm, regardless of what is going on around, that they have a sense of just a kind of, not zenness, but a calmness about them, that they can take everything in their stride. So emotionally, they've got everything together, that they're not reacting, that they are not being super emotional about things the entire time. So we've got a physical and a sort of emotional sense of calmness, that sense of gravity, being really connected to the ground. Now, the second part is levity. And this is really, really important because sometimes we think of gravitas and we can think of being very serious. Now, we don't want to be walking around our business or our organization like a little thundercloud and being super serious the entire time, because that just makes us not fun to be around. And if you are leading a team of people, they want to be able to feel relaxed in your company as well. So we want this sense of levity, of lightness, of bringing hope, of bringing fun, of bringing enjoyment. You know, we spend a lot of time at work. We really want to be enjoying that time. So what I say to people is that we really want to be taking the work seriously. So we want to do our best possible job we can possibly do with the work. But that doesn't mean we have to take ourselves seriously. We can have fun with ourselves. We can poke fun at ourselves. We can be silly with ourselves when the time is right. And then we can hunker down, focus, and do the job that needs to get done when we need to do that too. So it's really important that we have the combination of those two things. If it's all fun and light, then you're never really going to get the results that you want. If it's all super serious, you'll get the results you want, but nobody's going to have much fun in the process, and you might have quite a high churn in your team. So we need the two things together. We need this sense of gravitas, and we need a sense of levity and lightness as well. And then the final bit that comes in this top part of the equation is having grace under fire. So when things go wrong, when the unexpected happens, when disaster strikes, or there's a crisis of some kind, big or small, that you are the kind of person that does not lose it in that moment, that we keep that sense of gravity, that sense of being connected to the floor, or being emotionally calm, of listening, absorbing information, thinking clearly, and then communicating clearly with the team about what needs to be done. But in the moments where you can, having that sense of lightness, not assigning blame, not losing your temper, all those things are really, really important. That grace under fire really determines gravitas and executive presence, because you can have executive presence when things are going brilliantly well and everything is going smoothly. But if you cannot maintain it under fire when things are getting a little bit stretchy or stressed, then that undermines the impact that you've had when things were really, really going well. So that's kind of above the line. Now, what comes below the line? Well, it's communication skills, having really, really high quality communication skills. Because it's all very well having that sort of sense of executive presence, but then you have to communicate your message to the teams, to the people below you, to the people above you. We need to be able to communicate that information all the time and rectify mistakes. So where there's been a miscommunication, where somebody has misunderstood something that they need to do, We need to be able to rectify that really very quickly and effectively, and again, without blame. And then when there's time, revisit that situation, work out where the miscommunication happened, set up processes that will prevent that from happening again without blame. So that high quality communication means you will have high quality relationships with people. If you've got high quality relationships with people, the likelihood is you are going to have high quality results. And obviously the converse is true. Low quality relationships, generally you're going to get low quality results. So we need that communication skill to kind of sit underneath your ability to have gravitas, to demonstrate levity, and to have grace under fire. And there's one final thing, one final element that needs to sit alongside this equation, and that's consistency. So we need to be able to see that you can do this all of the time, whether that's a water cooler conversation, whether that's a huge presentation to a very important account, whether that's your first or biggest pitch for investment for your business, if you're scaling, whatever it might be a one-to-one with an individual in your team. If you can demonstrate that sense of executive presence all the time, then you're really tapping into that perception that we talked about earlier, that you are somebody with executive presence in all areas. You're demonstrating you're not only ready for now, you're demonstrating you're ready for next. And that is critical for expanding your business if you're an entrepreneur, critical for developing your career if you're within an organization. So really, really important that we've got that sense of consistency across time, consistency across scenario, and consistency in terms of whether things are going well or not so well, not as we planned. So very important that we can map across those three particular areas. So that's really how I would define executive presence when it comes to communication, when it comes to leadership with women. And when I think about this, I think about one particular client. She's an entrepreneur. She had an incredible business, really, really interesting in the biotech field. And she'd had a couple of knocks to her confidence. She'd done incredibly well from a very, very young age. A couple of things had happened and it really knocked her personal confidence. And it meant that her executive presence had kind of like dipped off a little bit. She could still do it within her team. She could still demonstrate it in her organization, but demonstrating it beyond her organization had become a little bit of a challenge. So we worked on that sense of consistency, of pivoting what she could already do, just picking it up and pivoting in it and using it in a different direction. And really sort of honing in on this sense of levity, because of the knock in confidence, everything had become very serious. Everything had become like we ought to. Everything had become like she was carrying the responsibility for absolutely everything on her shoulders. And then that became her story for a little while. So we're working on consistency across different areas and bringing back in that levity, that, allowing her personality to shine, because she has a very interesting, bubbly, excited personality. And that had kind of been stripped away by these few things that had gone wrong. So we really wanted to build that back into her repertoire. And so through coaching, we did just that. We worked on the consistency and pivoting, and we worked on bringing in these additional skills, or revisiting, because you already had them, but rediscovering and revisiting and reusing those skills of levity. And the result is that she's now putting together a pitch for a presentation for an investment of multiple millions of pounds. And, the difference is absolutely phenomenal. That wasn't going to happen a few months ago. Now it's kind of, it's the presentation is being written. She's getting ready to do it. It's a completely different person that is now going out there and really demonstrating that executive presence internally, conviction to her team that they can do this, that they're in the right place, and conviction when she goes out to talk to those investors. So we've talked about why executive presence is important, and we've talked about what it is, and we've seen that, we can turn it around. We may have had it, we may have lost it, we can get it back. We may never have really felt like we had it. We can learn how to do it. And in this next section, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to break down the idea of executive presence into 3 elements. And those three elements have multiple parts, and you can learn to do all of these things. Now, as I talk through them, you're probably going to realize, actually, I already do this. I already do that. Or I do that everywhere. Or maybe I do that one thing. I'm really good at doing that thing with my team. I'm not so good at doing that when I speak to the executive or the board. So maybe it's about pivoting those skills. So as I'm going through, kind of really take a notice of, yeah, I do that all the time, or I do that inconsistently, or I never do that. And then by the end of this video, you should be able to work out the kinds of areas that you need to work on to really begin to develop, to boost your executive presence in terms of its consistency across time, across scenario, and across the sort of stress continuum, if you like. So what's the first element? It's clarity. So whenever we are talking to anybody, whether that's one person in a one-to-one meeting, whether that's thousands of people in an auditorium, whether we're looking for investment or whether we are giving somebody a pep talk, it doesn't really matter. We do need clarity of communication. So let's look at what I mean by clarity, and we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at your intent, your content, and then we're going to look at your speech. So what do I mean by intent? So what is your intention for this particular audience? Is that clear in your mind? Because whenever you speak to anybody, we really need a clear intention. Now, it might be that you just want to catch up with this person because you haven't seen them for ages. So the intention is find out what's going on in their lives. If you're going into a senior meeting and you need more budget, then you need to know exactly how much budget you need and when you need it by, where are your non-negotiables. So I know that I need to go in here. My intention is for them to really understand this problem and understand why I need more money. So the intention is very specific and really, really super clear. And it's a combination of why you want to talk to these people and the passion. Yeah. So, if that's at water cooler, you're catching up. It's like, oh, it's so lovely to see you. Let them see that you're excited to see them and you want to hear about their voice. If it's to do with a budget, it's okay. Why is this so important? Why do we really need this money? What is going to make the difference when we get this money? And allowing that passion to show through. So if your why you're speaking to them is really, really clear in your head, then allow the passion to show through. Then the intention of your conversation is going to be so clear to your audience. Now that brings us down to the content. So we need to make sure that your idea is really clear. So what specifically are you trying to communicate to your audience? Well, today, if we talk about what I'm doing here, I want people to understand what is executive presence and that you have an ability to build executive presence in your life and in your career, and it will make an impact. That's it. I just want people to understand that. So if you come away from this video and you've got that understanding, then hopefully I've achieved my goal. So the content, the idea needs to be really, really super clear. The structure needs to be super clear. So following from A to B to C to D, we need to know exactly where we're going. And then the language needs to be really clear. So if you work in an industry where there's a lot of jargon, where there are a lot of acronyms, just make sure that everybody in the room really understands what you're talking about. Be cognizant whether you're talking to a mixed audience, a technical audience, a totally non-technical audience. Make sure that you really understand who you're talking to and how you need to adapt your language to make sure that they're going to understand what you're talking about. And then finally, your speech. Is your speech clear? And when I say speech, I mean the sounds of your speech. So are you articulating nice and clearly? Are you speaking fast or too slow? Are you mumbling? Are you using pauses? So as long as your speech is clear and at a pace that people can really follow, you should be absolutely fine. So we need clarity of intent, clarity of content, and clarity of speech sounds to make it easy as possible for your audience to understand your message. Then we're going to move on to connection. So the second stage of executive presence is connection. And again, there's three parts to this: connection to yourself, connection to your audience, and connection to your message. So if you've heard any of my videos before, you will have heard me say this before, and I will say it again, probably till the end of time. Whatever you're thinking will leak out of your communications somehow or another. So if you're standing there and you're thinking, oh, I don't really know this stuff, I don't really know this topic, they're going to ask me about that thing and I don't want to talk about that thing, that is going to come across, and you are not going to look like someone with executive presence. So we need to be connected to the idea that we are enough, that we're enough, we know enough in this moment. And if you don't know everything, that's absolutely fine. You're not a computer, you're not a robot, you don't have to know everything. You need to know what's within your wheelhouse, you need to know what's outside your wheelhouse, and communicate clearly when something's gone outside your wheelhouse, and that you can get the information when it's necessary. But it's very important that we go into those scenarios knowing and feeling and believing that we are enough in that moment. So if you're not feeling like that, then there's probably a bit of work to do around there. We have to make sure that the internal dialogue matches the external information. Then the second part is them. So what does this audience need from you right now? Do they need intellectual support? Do they need emotional support? Do they need a little bit of both? And most audiences will probably need a little bit of both. So what is it that you need to connect with them about today? And then finally, connecting to the message. So there's a relationship that goes on between you as the speaker, the audience who you're talking to, and the message. And we want the passion that you have for this particular message to land with the audience. You want the audience to really kind of develop a relationship with your message, and you want to develop a relationship with the audience. So we've got this lovely triangle going on, and we really want to build that as you're speaking. So very, very important that the passion for what you're talking about comes across, that it feels persuasive. So you've got all the elements of your argument, really kind of all your ducks in a row, that you are persuasive. And your speech needs to build momentum. So it needs to be going somewhere. And we need a really strong call to action at the end. So what do you want your audience to be thinking, feeling, or doing by the end of it? Now, if we go back to that water cooler chat, it might be that that person walks away from you thinking, oh, that was so great to run into Emma today. You know, it was a really nice chance to catch up with her, so that they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel like that relationship has been nurtured a little bit. That can be it. That can be enough, that they feel differently when they've moved away from the conversation with you. Other times the call to action might be much more structured, much more serious. You know, it may be about somebody signing on that dotted line, or your boss signing off on extra budget or extra time for a project, whatever it might be. So it needs to have passion, persuasion, and momentum, that moving towards that call to action, moving the conversation forward. So if you can connect to yourself, if you can connect to your audience, and you can connect to your message, then it's much easier to demonstrate that executive presence that we've been talking about. So let's look at the final part of executive presence when it comes to communication. And it's all about credibility. And we're going to talk about vocal credibility, credibility of your body, and then the credibility of a balanced message. So what do I mean by vocal credibility? Well, we all use different voices all the time. We have different energies that we use with our voices. So for instance, you wouldn't read a story to your 4-year-old or your child in the same voice that you might talk to your boss about a problem with a project. You wouldn't ask an investor for money in the same way that you talk to your dog. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that we all have different ways of using our voice all the time, except when it comes to business presentations, in which case we all get very serious, quite monotone, and maybe a little bit too fast. That's not demonstrating executive presence. So someone with executive presence can and does use their voice with vocal variety. So there's changes of pace, changes of tone, changes of energy. You know, it's a very colourful vocal landscape, and that makes it much, much easier to follow what they're saying. In terms of their body, what we tend to see is really well-aligned body posture. So they're standing really well, really open, with a lovely long spine. When they do move, they're moving with purpose. When they do gesture, it really makes sense with what they're saying. They're bringing their ideas together with their gesture. It's not that they're randomly moving their hands and distracting you as they talk. And if it's relevant, and this can be relevant even in a very small space, they're using the stage. They've got good stagecraft. So they're using that space in ways that really help you learn and understand what it is that they're talking about. It helps that message land. So we need vocal credibility and we need physical credibility to really get a sense of somebody's executive presence. But the final thing that we need when it comes to credibility is balance. So you could tell us the most amazing story, really compelling story, but if it isn't evidenced, if there's no structure to that story, if we don't believe that there is the infrastructure behind your story to support the action that we need to take, we're probably not going to take it. We start to care, but we don't really know what to do. Now, if your presentation or your talk or whatever it might be is super structured, super evidenced, lots of data, lots of clear things that we need to do, we could go and do it, but do we really care? Maybe, maybe not. So what we need is the two things together. We need to really care. So we need that emotional story. We need to really care why we do this. And then we need the structure. Then we need the evidence. Then we need the protocol, whatever it might be. How do we go about doing this thing? If we don't have that balance, it won't, the message won't land as clearly. So people who have executive presence can take a story, wrap it around a business structure or a business idea, and really get that to live. So that balance is super, super important. So what have we talked about today? We've been talking about executive presence and why it's so important for women particularly to develop executive presence when they are speaking at work. It's much easier for men to demonstrate executive presence, often simply because they're physically bigger. They just take up more space. Their voices are deeper. Their gestures are slightly bigger because their arms are a bit longer. They don't have a sense of being concerned about taking up space in the same way that women do. So culturally, we've been socialized to be a lot smaller, to not take up so much space, and to work a little bit more collaboratively. So we don't want to get rid of working collaboratively, absolutely not. But we do want to take up a bit more space vocally and physically. So it's important for our careers. It's important for the perception that we have within our organization. It's important if we're starting to develop thought leadership. It's important in terms of how those opportunities are going to present themselves. And it's really important because of non-alignment. So you could work incredibly hard on developing a brilliant idea, creating a wonderful presentation. But if it's not aligned, if your body, if your breath, your voice, and your content don't sit comfortably together, the message won't land, no matter how brilliant it is, or at least not as easily and not as consistently. So you could be working incredibly hard, and it just not land. So what we want is for you to work a little bit less hard, because that's important, and for the message to land because it's aligned. Your body, your voice, your breath, the way it's structured, the way you're showing up is incredibly congruent with the content. So it's really, really important. And then I talked about the three things that you need to do to really develop your executive presence. And that was clarity, connection, and credibility. So we need a clarity of the message. So what's your intention? And that's a combination of your why and your passion for whatever it is that you happen to be talking about that day. Then it was the content. Is your idea clear? Is the structure clear? Is your language clear? And then finally, is your speech clear? So are you articulating well? Is there enough space in your mouth? Are you mumbling? Are you speaking at too fast a pace? Are you using pause? So we need a real nice clarity around the way you actually speak your message. And then we talked about connection. So connecting to you, clearing out the clutter. If there's clutter, those imposter syndrome thoughts, or that inner critic is having a bit of a party, we've got to get rid of that stuff because it gets in the way of the message. It gets in the way of you connecting to your body and using your body in a way that demonstrates executive presence. Then the next part of connection is about connecting to that audience and making sure that you are supporting them intellectually and emotionally, whatever it is that they need in that moment, and that you're responding to how they're absorbing your message. So you're watching and seeing, is this landing? Do I need to speed up? Do I need to slow down? Do I need to explain that particular piece, that jargon again, or that particular piece of the structure again? So you're really responding to what's going on. And then the final piece of connection is connecting to the message. If you're not connected to your message, your audience certainly isn't going to be connected to it. So allowing that passion to show, to shine through, allowing your content to be persuasive. So what is it you really want them to be thinking, feeling, and doing? And then finally, that it's building momentum to that call to action. What do you want them to be thinking, feeling, doing, taking action on when you finish speaking? So if we can be connected to our message, it's much easier for the audience to start to connect to it too. And then finally, we're talking about credibility. So vocal credibility, making sure there was enough interest in your voice, that the audience is going to stay connected to your message and they can follow the message really easily. And then the second part of connection is about body, credibility, is about how you use your body. So using your body in an aligned, open way, using stagecraft, so using the space that you've been given really well, and making sure that that gesture is really helping pull together the content. And then finally, making sure that your message is credibly balanced. So you've got the heart story, you've got the emotional story, you've got the reason that we should care, but you've also got the evidence to support it and structure it. Now, often we can use the evidence first, and actually what we really need to do, people who have incredible executive presence are brave enough, are strong enough, are centered enough to really start with that emotional content and then build in the structure and the evidence and the data underneath it to support it. So having that balanced story can really help develop your credibility. I trust that you found today's video really useful and that you now have an idea about where you are already using executive presence at work, where you could develop it more, where there are areas that you feel like, I haven't got this yet, or that you feel like you're demonstrating quite well for the now, but you're not quite demonstrating for the next part of your career or your scaling of your business. Then I would invite you to take our scorecard, our executive presence scorecard. Super easy, very straightforward, multiple choice questionnaire, and it will help you define the areas where you are already doing brilliantly and the areas where you need to start to step up, to build new skills or to declutter in terms of thought processes, to allow you to really shine and show that executive presence so that you are front of mind when these opportunities come to the fore, that people are thinking, yes, let's get so-and-so to talk about this. Yeah, let's get her in because she's brilliant at this area of the business. So that people are coming to you rather than you having to reach out to them. Because that, at the end of the day, is what executive presence does for you. It just helps raise your visibility, it helps raise your credibility for the now and for the next. Take care, and I will speak to you very soon. Bye for now.